If you want to save money on your trading card purchases, we have a promo link over at 50cards.shop. Enter the promo code @night to get 5% off your order.
Hey everybody, welcome to Nexus at Night, your weekly Vanguard podcast. I'm Atlas.
I'm Matt.
Matt's very tired. I'm Root Beer.
And I can see the long blinks in the hair. That's, yeah. Sorry, guys.
I'm a mess.
Well, how's it going, fellas?
It's going.
Yep.
I've been playing a lot of Last Epoch.
Last Epoch.
Yep.
Was this something we discussed on Tangents, or is this a different thing?
I don't know, but patreon.com/Nexus at Night.
It came out 2 days ago, so I would be shocked if we discussed it on Tangents.
Well, it could have been something where you're like, I'm excited for this thing.
Oh, I might have already been talking about Balatro instead, which came out 3 days ago, which is also very fun.
If I remember correctly, the last thing you brought up was the it was like a game with like poker hands.
Yeah, that's Balatro.
Right? Okay, that was Balatro. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So today we're talking about the Stride decks, which are being released in English.
Yep.
At the time you're hearing this week. And yeah, we had already kind of gone over the effects and stuff, but we got some more to say.
Well, I wanted to just talk about the concept of Stride decks in general, because now that these ones are coming out, of course, people are going to be discussing it again.
True.
Like us.
Mm-hmm.
We're helpful.
Yeah, but, you know, like, the Stride decks have been very powerful throughout their, like, times in the meta, except for Messiah, and, you know, if you look over at Japan right now, well, I guess not now anymore because of DZ, but, like, prior to DZ, the Stride decks were very powerful. They were, like, the top 2 decks in terms of, I think, overall play rates.
Yeah.
And at the very least, Luard converted pretty well. I think Shiranui makes it into, like, top 8 and then falls off in top 4 because everyone keeps, like, designing their decks to beat Shiranui because it's like the most played deck. And, you know, a similar thing happened when Chrono Jet came out, where it dominated the meta, and so, you know, that has some people feeling kind of upsetty. So, like, how do we feel about the concept of the Stride decks, like, overall?
Okay, so I like the idea of having them for the sake of. Sorry, my wife is watching a Pelicans game right now, and like there was a big fight on the court, and but it's nice that it's a way to bring back these like older units into Overdress. Mm-hmm. So for the people who are either Vanguard boomers or people who showed up during G, you're like, oh, I can latch on with this, or if it's just been a while, right? You come back and you can do this as a easy way to scan, but at the same time, it's like an indicative problem of them just kind of like jamming in this old mechanic instead of trying to do Overdress as a thing with those old units. Like, oh, here's the Overdress version of Chrono Jet. It's just like, nah, it's just the same guy. Here's a crest. I think it almost comes off lazy a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Especially because, like, there's still a lot of, like, D-isms, right? Where you're
D-isms?
God, that sounds so bad, but, like, I don't know what else to, like, call it right now, where, like, you still have the ride deck, right? And, like, with a lot of ride decks in D, like, it's basically, well, actually, it's literally essential, because you can't stride without the crest. Mm-hmm. So it is, like, an essential part, it is an essential component of the deck. And it also makes it so that, like, trying to transition between formats becomes weird. I know that was something that we had talked about with the Stride decks before when they first came out, was like it could be a gateway into premium.
And then it just kind of isn't. Like, if there's anything that you use from the Stride decks, it's always like, I just took this one stride.
I mean, people will also just take.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is the deck doesn't give you 4 copies of the grade 1 because you don't need it in standard, but people do play like crest versions of their respective decks that play the grade 1.
I have a problem with that. I'll get to it later, but yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've never been too fond of the nostalgia pandering in D. I say this as Prism is currently the deck I am playing for standard, but like I remember when encounter units were introduced in like set 2, that was something I was like, why are we doing this already? Like, it made more sense in set 5 because that was the 10-year anniversary. So like retraining those old iconic cards made sense.
Mm-hmm.
But like in general, I think the Stride decks are weird because Stride as a mechanic, and I've been thinking about this a little bit, which is why I made my random hot take tweet about G-Era kind of sucking for a lot of it, actually. But that's a different discussion. But like Stride as a mechanic is actually pretty different from how Vanguard is played for a lot of its lifespan, right? Because going from the original era of Vanguard to G was a pretty radical departure in like the design philosophy and gameplay.
Yes.
And then, you know, as we transition into like V era and now D, like the way Vanguard is played for the majority of its lifespan is actually pretty different from that brief period of time in G era. Obviously, it's still around because of premium format, but you know, when you're talking about like the mainline standard format that newer players would get into, like striding is not very representative of what Vanguard is for most of its life.
Yeah. And like Boomer Vanguard and Overdress have more in common than G.
Yeah. So that was something I started thinking about, especially because like the big thing about G is you have an extra deck, right? So your strides kind of give you the ability to have different Vanguards in a way that you don't for your regular like ride to grade 3 and then that's your boss unit. Like in ye olden days, you might play multiple different grade 3s that have viable effects because you have to ride something. But, you know, now that we're in D format where riding is guaranteed, like that's not really a thing anymore. So the idea of being able to just on the fly change your Vanguard to whatever suits the situation is something very unique to like G era and striding.
Yeah.
Any comments?
Matt, any I feel like I've been stepping on you this whole time.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So where it's been a comparatively small amount of time, but it feels like it's taken up so much space, not just in the design, but just the rhythm of how the game moves for premium, and then to see it show up in standard, where even then it's very deliberate, right? You're not having the stride sets having more strides come out down the line. You have the 2 to 3.
It's just 2.
It's just 2. Wasn't there a third one in one of them?
Nope.
Am I blanking? Okay. Or it's just the 2, and then that's it. Which, by the way, I remember when we were talking about the Luard one the first time, the drag strider, where we didn't know if you could like do Luard's effect. You can, yeah. Just a correction, but
I feel like we decided that it could do that when we were reviewing the episode, but maybe we didn't. I
don't know. I always feel bad whenever I'm watching like a TV show or a podcast, and they're like, I can't remember if this or that happened, and it's like, it's your show. How do you forget? And I forget fucking everything. So sorry.
But yeah, But just to clarify the ruling in case anyone was confused, like Luard's skill says you can stride without paying the cost. So the cost for Drag Strider would have been discarding a grade 3 with Luard, which you are now bypassing.
Yep.
As long as it has that stride keyword, right?
Yes, correct. So yeah, I'm kind of torn where I think okay, you want to know why? It's because Stride and G era are where I met the most of my friends.
Hi.
Hi. Where I met the most of my Vanguard friends and the most of the friends that I still talk to was during G era. And the break that I took was at the end of Boomer Vanguard, like during Legion, and then I came back once, like a couple packs into G era, and then I just haven't left. So maybe that's why it becomes like such a like crystallized moment for me. My favorite era in the whole game was in G era. I think, like you said on the hot take, that it was the suckiest time. I'm saying that it had the highest highs and the lowest lows of. Yeah,
I think from a gameplay perspective, G era had the most going on.
Yeah, it definitely had the most going on, but it also had some of the most like degenerate bullshit.
Correct.
But the game was awful when I started playing. I started around GBT7, so that would be right around the time like Refros looping was winding down. I can't remember if Refros was already banned when I started playing, or if it was like got banned while I was starting the game. But we were winding down like Refros loops with no CL and moving into like time leap format, and then that's not including things that like Vanguard Jewel Knight that was around for a little bit, grade 2 Rush with ripples, and then I was around for 7 Seas Rush. So like I feel like the early half of G era was actually. Now, I feel like the early part of G era, maybe up until GBT3, nothing was happening and people were still playing Legion decks with strides on top of them.
Correct. And
then like around GBT3 up through about GBT9 is when all of the degenerate combo decks existed.
You also had the like microcosm that was PBO, the unguardable PBO.
Oh yeah, Phantom Blaster Diablo, sorry. Yeah, but like I'm looking back at historical tops, I don't think it was that huge of a thing. Like the meta was all over the place because nobody knew anything about how to play Vanguard back then.
It was, but the attention, the zeitgeist was on PBD, and arguably you could say that G guards were made because of it, but that's a conspiracy theory.
I feel like they came out too close together for that to really be the case, but. Yeah, like early G era or mid G era was probably some of the worst Vanguard to ever exist.
And then like late G era from like 10 to 14 was my favorite time of the game.
Yeah, no, late G era was cool.
Yeah. All right. It's when you have Blade Wings, all that other good stuff. It's a fun time.
I feel like you have rose-tinted goggles on Blade Wings, though, because...
Yes, I do.
Like, my memory of Blade Wing Assassin was Demagogue Turbo.
Yeah.
Where you would, like, stride Soulless Demagogue, then Soul Charge 15 times and attacks, and then make 7 attacks with 30k Enigmatic Assassins.
Yeah, your goal was either, if you couldn't do that first stride, you had to kind of rope-a-dope people until you set it up. Like, it was just like waiting for your moment to, go for the gold.
Yeah.
Still my favorite deck of all time. Sorry.
Yeah, but that like existed in that transition meta where like they were slowly banning Time Leap out of existence, and people kept coping it back into existence. And so we had that brief period of like Blade Wing Assassins and Wise Men loops before they killed that.
Right. Yep. And to be fair, Assassin doesn't need to be at 4 ever again. Like no. I'm not being like bring back Assassin, I don't care. But I think it was just a nice moment where it felt like one of the few defensive decks out there ish. That was kind of cool. Also there was like that couple of years span where you had like Mega Colony winning.
Well, that was more premium era, although Mega Colony was good late G era with the Gridora Strider.
Yeah.
And was it Heldemise, the one that got quad drive?
Was that Heldemise? I can't remember.
I don't remember its name. No.
It was something else. It was Overwhelm.
Oh yeah, okay, I was right. Yeah. I don't remember. I remember Overwhelm being like the name that I remembered, but I don't know why that was.
Yeah, it was Overwhelm.
Mm-hmm.
What is
it? So it's like you draw up to the same number of cards as your opponent's rested rear guards, and then if they have one or less unit or one or less rear guards, then you get critical +1, drive +1. So you would like Gridora cut off one of their columns. You would like rest, and then you would like stun the other thing. So if they only have the one unit on board that's stunned, then it gets a crit in the drive.
I remember, kids. This is before Excel circles were a thing. So it's. I feel like saying that is the equivalent of me telling my students that like back before cell phones were a thing, or you couldn't just look this up on Google or whatever the thing is. It's like that same energy.
Oh yeah, and Gridora also like stole your counterblast, so
yes,
Overwhelm randomly had an ability that gained your front row like 2k for each face down card your opponent had.
Yeah, Overwhelm was
now all units get 2k for every face down card.
I mean, they deserved it.
Yeah.
At the time. The Gridora Stride that came later was so nuts and is still nuts to this day.
Yeah.
But so these Stride decks. What's the initial question that we're asking here?
Well, I just wanted to have a discussion about them. So we talked about how we feel about them in general. How do we feel about the specific design choices? Because I remember one thing in regards to the encounter cards in D, especially compared to V era, because it was basically a filler in between formats, was that a lot of V era cards do not resemble their originals in any way. And so, how do we feel about the overall design choices made with each Stride deck? How does that feel? Both in terms of their power level, but also their play styles.
I already have the original, right? And especially with the return of with the history collection stuff, where you're incentivized to play those old Striders, it feels like you're not getting enough. The thing I point to the most is Sacrifice Messiah. The one in the deck set it has to have you jump through hoops for this counter charge. Meanwhile, the one from G era, the one that's still used today, is when you lock something, lock him, counter charge something, give 3k somewhere. It feels at simultaneously lazy and like a cop out, or you're being robbed of something. By doing that, I get the point of trying to keep the power level reasonably the same in D era. Fine, but just make something else, Yeah. I've picked up many a deck that's not the same thing that I was playing before. It kind of reminds me. You know what it reminds me of is the live action Disney remakes.
That's a pretty good comparison.
Okay, so we already have the original thing that I can play / watch. Why are you doing this?
Have you considered that you might need the thing again?
I'm going to give myself a star on the other side.
What if you did a second live action Avatar?
I haven't watched it yet. Don't ruin this.
I just read the review. It was
is
so
it
funny.
A problem? Because I've been trying to get Katie to watch it with me, the original one, the show, for years now, and she's like, "I'll watch it with you."
All right.
If you watch, what was the show you wanted me to watch with you?
We have to watch Key and Peele all the way through.
We're gonna watch Key and Peele all the way through, which I like Key and Peele, so that's easy for me.
That seems like a pretty good trade-off for you.
There was one comment in the review that really got me, but I don't know if I should say it here.
I don't know. Save it for tangents, maybe? Patreon.com/Nexus.
If I can live that long.
But yeah, so it like I said, lazy, but also feels like a cop-out. That's my stance.
Yeah, and also has like an interesting effect on like where the nations have gone in D era, because like Messiah doesn't resemble anything in Brandgate, right?
Nope.
Like
set orders.
Chronojet has kind of been able to adapt itself to what D era Dark States is doing, because it has that one card that gives it the on hit to soul charge so that you can fuel your GGs and have that draw power.
Right.
And then I don't know that it's tops anything, but like another adaptation people have tried to make was playing like all of the order cards from set 11 to give it a more aggressive early game.
Okay.
But like Messiah can't do any of that, right? Because the way you play with locking your own cards like doesn't translate to anything that happens in Brandgate.
Yeah. Like the crest doesn't count as a set order, really.
Nope.
No. So
like the crest is just its own thing.
Yeah, and there's things like the loading dock or whatever it is that lets your grade 2s boost, but that's not impactful enough, nor is it conducive enough to what Messiah is doing. You don't really have these grade 2s that you want to put in the back for whatever reason.
Like, you don't need it because of the crest. Which,
exactly. So
speaking of, how do we feel about the crest? Because I feel like that is probably the most controversial aspect of these decks.
That's the lazy part to me, is we're just porting this in from the past, but we're going to update it for modern times by using this crest instead of just making a new unit. And this is also where my critique of the grade 1s comes in. So these grade 1s, 1 per TD, fine. It's supposed to only be in the ride line. People are, they're like being priced at like $20-$25 because people assume you can use them in premium. Attention, people using the crest grade 1s in premium. Don't do that. Here's why. Either you ride correctly in premium, because this isn't a ride line, and you get your crest, and everything goes great. You have 3 cards in your deck that have 5k shield. If you misride, that's 4 dead cards in your deck.
Come on, babe.
I will die on this hill. It drives me crazy that people are like, I'm gonna cram a Sleep Messiah. I'm like, don't bother. Run grade 1s that do stuff.
Yeah. So in terms of like, see, that's the really frustrating thing too, is like when they get the crest, it's actually really ridiculous, especially with the history strides now. Because I played against Messiah at BCS, where they kept using the like V Amber clones to cycle for a Sleep Messiah, and so they got the crest power and 2 Force 2 gifts, so they were just swinging for like 50k with a crit.
Okay. And if they didn't, like, I get that it was impactful, but the consistency of it doing so.
I mean, if they didn't, I think they just play regular Messiah with Force 1, and they probably just have similar numbers anyways, just without the crit.
I always just used Volko Gode for the power, and then Force 2 every time. It works pretty well. I'm not sure how that like stands for Luard or Shiranui.
I mean, Luard's not topping anything anytime soon, and it's hard to say for Shiranui because it is already a good deck, but like the deck set didn't exist yet when it topped Worlds, so you know. Well, yeah, I say topped Worlds, it got 5th place.
That's something. Still Worlds, you know. I don't know. It just really, really bothers me that people try and like min-max like that when it just doesn't seem worth it.
Just cheat, so you always have it in your opener.
There you go.
Obviously.
That's the kicker. That's how you do it.
Yeah. And then of course, like the controversial part of it in standard is the scaling 5k power.
Right.
Like that was just not correct, right? Like they did not need to put that.
Yeah, like it's supposed to be. Oh, it's supposed to mimic Persona Ride, but after 2 turns, it's already bigger.
Yeah,
and no need to find the Persona Ride. It's just there. The rest of the game.
Mm-hmm. And it's especially ridiculous with like the newest ones for Shiranui and Luard, because for some godforsaken reason they decided that Shiranui needed 2 additional restanders in addition to having like Esper or Rida.
Yeah.
That was a great design decision.
They're gonna have to like design around Esper or Rida in Dragon Empire forever until they ban it. Yeah. Which they won't.
Like they didn't design around it at all. They gave them like better versions of it for Shiranui. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know what Bushiroad was smoking on that one.
All right, we're Bushiroad. Thanks for coming to our putting a hat on a hat seminar. And
yeah. So while I'm on this tangent, how do we feel about their impact on the meta? Because that was like a big thing at the time, where it was frustrating for people that like, we've rebooted the game, we're in this new era, and like the top decks for these respective time periods is a nostalgia deck from like 8 years ago.
They really want that nostalgia for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's been quite clear, right?
Yeah. And also like they're just very frustrating to play against, because like in its time there wasn't a lot that could compete with Chronojet when it came out, right? Like it was very clearly one of the top 2 decks. It was like, I think, because it was topping around Springfest season, so every team was like Chronojet, Eva, plus some restanding Vanguard, whether that was like Youthberg, Minerva, Overlord. Mm-hmm. And that was just every single team was some configuration of like Chronojet, Eva, and one of the like 3 different restanders. And then Messiah didn't have as much of an impact on the meta because it was coming out at the same time as things like Gondiva and Willista when Festival Collection came out. So there was a more even playing field of things that could actually compete against Messiah. And then now Shiranui and Luard are so like overwhelming. MBT had made 10-minute testing about like the Snake Eyes Fire King deck, and he had made a comment about how it's not necessarily tier 0 in terms of play percentage, but it's functionally tier 0 in the sense that like everything in the meta is going to have to think about Snake Eyes now. And I feel like Shiranui has had the same effect, at least in the Japanese meta, where like all of your deck building now has to center around beating Shiranui because it's just been that dominant of a deck.
Mm. I can't remember who said this, like the name for this, but it's like the meta gatekeeper, where it's like, can your deck deal with this? If not, kick rocks.
Yeah, because I know like a recent tournament, like there was the first place deck was a Luard list that was playing like orders and stuff, and it was playing a very like aggressive build of the deck to try and like outpace Shiranui. And also, like, give it fewer options to dominate.
Right.
So, like, because, they just have to think about Shiranui all the time. And I think Chronojet had a similar effect where we were seeing, like, Rorora popping up in topping decks because it had a good Chronojet game, being able to, like, early game.
And and you could also just cram it into, like, anything Stoikea and go from there.
But like actual Rorora was topping.
Oh. Sorry.
Like that's what I mean. Because that deck had a really good early rush game at a time where not a lot of decks could do that. And so because the meta at that time was centralized around Chronojet existing. And so I do feel like 3/4 of the Stride decks have been like meta defining except for Messiah. Small tier.
I just love the like we always have to qualify for the Messiah.
Yeah.
Except for Messiah. They suck. They're terrible.
Yeah. Like Messiah's fine. It tops.
Suck
it's
lemons.
just
Yeah,
it's just like not dominating the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like no one ever looked at the Messiah deck and was like, oh my god, like this is the entire meta. I hate it. The same way that they did for Chronojet. and that they presumably will for Shiranui. Though an interesting thing is that we don't have those like grade 1 promos like the Doggo, and there's also one for Dragon Empire. That's like if you play in order or you do nation thing, the Dragon Empire one is if your opponent has one or less rear guards, then they gain like 5k, and then you can put them into soul or retire it for the Keter Sanctuary one, and then draw a card. And so that is a huge part of the early game for those decks.
Okay.
Also, I find it really funny. I think I have it here, where this card like got bought out during Luard's release, and nobody plays it anymore.
The good thing is that thing never really goes away, even in like premium, because it's always like not in standard, but in premium, it's always kind of relevant.
Yeah,
and anything yellow, because you can always fish something at a drop.
Yeah, but I remember people were like speculating about it in Luard because to like infinitely cycle PGs the way like the olden days, but then it turns out that you actually just have to play really quickly and try to kill Shiranui before it can get to second stride.
Yeah, so like you don't have the time to fuck around like that. Yeah, that's fair. I think just people miss Ezras that much.
Yeah. Also, like PGs are just kind of bad against Shiranui because it just makes so many attacks.
Right, so you're wasting hand in doing so.
Yeah. Although the attacks are also fuck huge, so maybe having the PG is still useful at the end of the day, but
little column A, little column B.
Yeah. Also, like recycling PGs is kind of useless against Luard itself because of Drag Strider.
No ones, yeah. But all this is to say that I think these deck sets are kind of bust.
Yeah.
Not in terms of like them being good. They're good, but
they're very good.
They are kind of a like if a drunk guy designed them a little bit. Like you take the thing from before and then you put another card that makes it like now.
Yeah.
Like that's the tech.
Like like as much as I appreciate some of the encounter cards we've gotten because I like Prism very much, I hope that DZ goes away from them.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Well, this is the new like monster of the week, but I think if the way they've done encounter like with Minerva, with Prism, with Lugier, like that's probably a better way to do it.
I think like the grade 3 encounters have been fine. Like the Stride decks have been very overtuned.
Anything to add, Matt?
I mean, they're clearly pushed because like they know their nostalgia. They know them being good will make them sell, right? So like, but it also means like we're just constantly stuck in like the same things that we already had.
Yeah,
I don't know. I like to see new stuff come out. I want to see them do new things, which they were doing for a little bit, but none of them really impacted premium because the rule sets of standard are just completely different.
Yeah, and now like the energy mechanic.
Yeah, I don't need the next live action whatever live action Naruto.
I'm calling this episode live action Luard just for the
live action Vanguard.
Also now they're like doing Crest as like dedicated premium support, and I feel like this is just the worst timeline for premium. We already talked about that last week.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, dear viewer/listener? Comment either below if you're on YouTube or if you're on your podcast app of choice. There's a thingy down there where you can comment or tweet at us at Nexus at Night. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/Nexus at Night. Thanks to Darren, Cole, Josh, Jeremy, GRLE, our $10 patrons. And how about the rest of us?
Find me on Twitter at Wiggums, 2Gs, 2Zs.
You can find me at Plasma Eclipse.
Find me at Atlas Novak in all the places, my other podcast, Generation Dan, in all the places, or my YouTube channel, The Epileptic Comic. Recently, I've been getting into history memes, so if you want to watch those, check that out. So thanks, everybody, for listening, and until next time, I was Atlas.
I'm still Matt.
I'm Root Beer.